Welcome to American Medieval, a podcast about the fact that if the United States has never been truly modern, it's probably because we've always been a little bit medieval. I'm your host, Professor Matthew Gabriele, and I've been researching, teaching, and talking about the Middle Ages, well, to anyone who will listen at least, for more than 3 decades. Each week on the show, we'll be joined by an expert scholar who will share their fascination with, and sometimes their revulsion by, both the medieval world itself as well as the ways the historical period has been remembered and used right here in the USA. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this very special episode of American Medieval, a collaboration with Wow If True, another sibling podcast in the multitude family of podcasts. I am Professor Matthew Gabriele, and we are joined today by Isabel J. Kim and Amanda Silberling, and we'll introduce ourselves in just a minute. Enjoy this special podcast.
So we have a podcast about the Middle Ages, and then we have a podcast about contemporary internet culture. So what brought us here together for the crossover episode of all crossover episodes?
The Reese's Peanut Butter Cup of podcasts, if you will.
Yes. I think that maybe just within multitude, we need to find like what are the most bizarre combinations of podcasts to collab with one another.
Oh, yeah.
Not to be like that would be like a great like ad or Instagram post or something like, but like weird mashups of podcasts. That would be a great post on social media, not to be on that hashtag grind set 24/7.
You are on that grind set. But so this is how we've ended up with, it sounds like the beginning to a joke of what if a professor of medieval history, a sci-fi writer / lawyer, and a tech journalist walk into a bar and talk about the intersection of each of their fields. That's what we're doing here today on Wow If True / American Medieval.
And arguably, it is not the weirdest crossover because for some reason, parentheses, the reasons are what we're going to talk about here today. Medieval aesthetics go hard on the internet, and that's kind of fun to talk about, and that's relevant to all of us here. Should we go in a circle and introduce ourselves?
Sure.
Sounds great.
All right, I will start. So, hi, I'm Isabel J. Kim. I am a science fiction author, occasionally an attorney, and mostly I look at posts on the internet, and that's what brings me here today.
Hello, I'm Amanda Silberling. I'm a tech journalist. I'm a senior culture writer for TechCrunch, and I write about how tech influences people. And I know very, very little about medieval history. So we are learning. 90% of the things I know about medieval history come from listening to American Medieval, including the fact that eels were used as currency at one point, which is that just really stuck with me, and I think stuck with a lot of listeners.
Everybody loved the eels episode. 100%.
Yeah, it was great.
So it was great. I'm Matthew Gabriele. I am the weirdo here. I'm a professor of medieval history. I spend a lot of time on the internet though too. So I feel like there's that connection as well. But one of the things I've always been interested in is how the Middle Ages have been remembered, both in the Middle Ages themselves, but then in later periods. So all this internet stuff is right up my alley, and it's stuff I've been paying a lot of attention to for reasons I think we're going to go into, especially later on in the episode.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm also the host of that podcast, American Medieval.
Yeah,
and me and Amanda host Wow If True, a podcast about internet culture. And also, I forgot to tell people to buy my book. Please pre-order my book. It is called Sublimation. Okay, thanks.
It's not medieval. There's a knife fight as opposed to a sword fight. I feel like in my head, I'm like, this is really Isabel's time to shine, even though I have no idea your relationship to medieval history, other than the fact that you own several swords, which is not related at all historically. That's just related to your mom had a martial arts studio and you grew up this way. But it feels aesthetically in the neighborhood.
That's the multitude connection among the podcasts, is like everybody likes swords.
That's the first question they ask you.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the most medieval thing about me is I did fencing in high school. And that is a particularly medieval sport that really only exists at the high school level in like New Jersey, New York, and parts of California, to my knowledge. And so, fencing sword in my house.
The most medieval thing about me is that I knew a chainmail guy. There was a time in my life where I had a chainmail guy.
Sorry, you need to explain that now.
It was just like a guy that I knew that made chainmail.
Okay, so he wasn't like the guy you went to for all of your chainmail needs, which happened.
Yeah, that was my question.
Because that's how it seemed to be phrased.
Sometimes this was like a weird circumstance in which I lived in a weird house in college where we would do like house shows and stuff, and there was a guy who lived there like decades before who would it sounds very weird, but he would show up with his chainmail and he would let people wear his chainmail. I didn't realize how expensive chainmail was until earlier this year when my boyfriend wanted to be Joan of Arc for Halloween, and I wanted to do a couple's costume, and he was like, I don't like couple's costumes because usually one person's costume is really in depth and the other person's costume is an afterthought. And I was like, well, I could be the steak. I can just be like fire. But he was like really seriously looking into being Joan of Arc, and then he was like, this is way too expensive of a bit. So I should have had my chainmail guy.
You should have had your chainmail guy. And, you know, you guys are making this out like this is weird. Like, this is my everyday experience, like, in a classroom, is like, all of my students, like, I have a chainmail guy. Like, I was in SCA, I went to a Ren fair, I watched Game of Thrones, I played this video game, like, or even, like, weirder stuff. Like, so this is just normal to me. Like, this is part of the experience of being a medieval historian in 2026, I think.
Okay, I gotta ask, how many chainmail guys do you have?
I have 0 chainmail guys myself. So I have certainly been in contact and talked with guys who have made chainmail, or blacksmith more generally, because they don't just make chainmail, and they want to make sure that you know that oftentimes. And part of that is from, you know, my childhood, where I went to, I love to go to Medieval Times. I didn't go there a lot, but I went to Medieval Times in Orlando a couple times, like on family vacations, and then went to Renaissance fairs in New York State where I grew up. And so there were always kind of chainmail guys there. And then when I first got to, I teach at Virginia Tech right now, and there was an active Society for Creative Anachronism group.
That rules.
Those are the guys who yeah, like, they dress up and they have, you know, very elaborate kind of backstories. And so there was students there that were blacksmiths who were just kind of, they would make the kit for the other students who would perform out on the drill field. Not perform, that's not right, but would do their thing kind of out on the main green at the university. So I have known chainmail guys almost my entire life.
Yeah, my chainmail guy now lives in Portland, but we're friends on Strava, so that's
Honestly,
the chainmail guy's on Strava. It's fine.
a chainmail guy being in Portland, likely place for him to be.
Yeah.
That feels like a Portlandia
Well,
bit.
I do think it's funny how on American Medieval, you usually ask the people that are also medieval historians, like, what would you say to your past self if you could go back and be like, you're going to be a medieval historian one day?
Yep.
And I'm like, what's the version of that for us? Because I feel like this is maybe why I'm not a medieval historian, but I never read Lord of the Rings. And I feel like that's the gateway.
For, like 50% of us. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then I'm just like, should I read it? Like, I feel like everything I know about it, I'm just like, it seems like there isn't a woman in the whole series.
Can I say something maybe controversial?
Please.
Don't. Like, it's not worth it. So I say that as a medievalist. I read Tolkien for the first time when I was like 30, like in graduate school, because I read plenty of fantasy, you know, when I was growing up, but it's not that good. It's just really not that good. And it is enjoyable in its own way, but I just don't think it's that good.
Putting on my fantasy author hat.
Oh, no. Okay.
No, so I kind of agree with you, but only because a lot of what modern fantasy is doing is it is replicating a lot of like what Tolkien is doing. And if you have read enough modern fantasy, you go back and you read Tolkien and you go, this is just like this other stuff I read, but the other stuff did it more interestingly.
Yep.
And it's because Tolkien is like kind of like the mold from which all of these things were shaped.
Yeah.
I kind of agree. I wouldn't say that you have to read it, but that being said, I think by not reading it, you are opening yourself up to a lifetime of everyone being like, you haven't read The Lord of the Rings. So think about
That's
that.
right,
I feel like I just want to understand the literary context of Palantir, because I know that, because in my tech journalism world, I obviously know that Palantir is like the evil, terrible surveillance company, but apparently Palantir is like a bad thing in The Lord of the Rings, which sort of is what created the meme of like a book saying like, don't create the Torment Nexus, and then a tech bro being like, I have founded my new company, Torment Nexus.
Yeah. I would say my interest in Tolkien is kind of academic in the sense that like exactly like Isabel's 100% right. And it's because it's a gateway for so many medievalists, it informs a lot of their scholarship. Tolkien himself was a medievalist too, I should say, like a professor of medieval literature at Oxford, wrote a number of academic articles, which it's always fun to share with students because they're like, they finally look at the author and they're like, is that the same guy? And we're like, yeah, that's the same guy. But there's a long history of fascists, especially, and like tech fascists are just kind of the latest iteration of being really in love with Tolkien, much to his chagrin. There was a whole piece when Maloney came to power in Italy, a few years ago. Like she pressured several museums to put on Tolkien exhibitions that her and her kind of fascist, and she's an avowed kind of neo-fascist as well. Like to go to these things and like went to a Hobbit camp when she was young. Like I'm not making like that. That's a real thing. Like so. Like it has all these kind of resonances, and then these tech guys name their companies after the most inappropriate things, like Erebor and Androl and Palantir and stuff like that. It's all these guys who just didn't understand anything about what Tolkien was saying about these things, but they thought they were cool words.
Yeah, it's like how Mark Zuckerberg at a certain point would give new Facebook employees a copy of Ready Player One.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh my
God. Sadness in your voice was incredible. If you look at, I think it's Anthropic's website, there is a list of recommended science fiction on it. So,
Is there?
Yeah, I don't quote me, that's Anthropic. It's one of the big ones. Okay. I don't remember if it was them or if it was OpenAI, but I do remember seeing a list of science fiction novels that people are recommended. And a lot of it is like very like anti-capitalist, like progressive science fiction that is being recommended by these dudes who are trying to build the devil.
Well, the thing is, Anthropic in general is like, they seemed promising because it seemed like they spun out of OpenAI because they were like, OpenAI isn't doing this in a way that's good for humanity, and we want to do it in a way that's good for humanity. But instead now they just kind of do the same shit. So
I mean, they are less evil, and I do believe they have a mission. We are also way off topic, but now that we're in like the evil tech zone, do we want to like flip the order we were going to talk about things and talk about like the Crusader Core stuff and like return with, the V and shit like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think this came up because we collectively were talking about the concept of Crusader Core, which seems to be like an online trend where mostly white men, the same kind of people that are probably hanging out on 4chan, are like really embracing the aesthetics of like the Jerusalem cross and basically just sort of like the same kind of white Christian men rule the world vibes that like this sort of just makes it look cooler because the aesthetics are cool. But then it's like, well, no, actually you're now in the territory where it's like, do you want to be associated with Pete Hegseth, who has multiple crusade related tattoos? I am looking at an article from Hyperallergic about this, and there is just shirtless Pete Hegseth there, which Pete Hegseth leads the Department of Defense and also is the guy who accidentally added an Atlantic journalist to the Signal chat about war plans. So that's our guy there.
Yep, that's our guy, Pete. So the Crusader Core stuff is interesting. The Crusader Core term, I should say, is really new. As someone who's been spent a little bit of time, especially since 9/11, way back when, following kind of right-wing invocations of the Crusades, and there have been a lot. Very famously, George W. Bush mentioned the actions against Al-Qaeda almost in the immediate aftermath as being kind of a new crusade. He kind of walked it back, but he didn't really, because they still used a lot of the language during his administration. And then Hegseth, of course, served in theater, and that's probably where he got those tattoos, is when he was serving in, I believe he's in Afghanistan, not in Iraq, which were those types of tattoos and patches and stuff like that were pretty common. What's different now, as you were pointing out, is exactly that, is it's become kind of an aesthetic in which it's kind of like a vibe thing, in which it's a posture on social media and gaming forums and stuff like that, in which it's trying to use the language of crusade in a way to kind of own the libs, and that's a little bit different. my concern with it, and I think I'm right about this, is that it carries violence with it. Like, because the same language that these guys are using in their aesthetics, like, was used by Breivik in his mass murder in 2011. It's used by Blackwater, the Eric Prince's Mercenaries. He was an avowed kind of fan of the Crusades and tried to recruit specifically guys who were into that. You know, there's biker gangs, like, of former vets that go around and terrorize minorities and, you know, stuff like that. There's been some reporting on that in The Intercept and the BBC and places like that. So this is bad stuff. Like, it's real bad stuff to be invoking the Crusades in this particular way and at this particular moment.
Yeah, and then in this article that I was looking at about Crusader core, if we're going to go with that term, they mention also that, like, Nick Fuentes, who is an alt-right podcaster and general just kind of gross bad guy,
king of the groypers, as it is.
Yeah, he has talked about, like, wanting to create, like, a new Catholic nation or something, and then also using imagery of Pepe the Frog as a crusader, which that makes my alarm bells go off, because something that I find myself very frequently referencing when I'm trying to talk about, like, how internet culture and actual politics intersect is Pepe the Frog, and how Pepe the Frog has been, like, completely bastardized into a pro-Trump symbol leading up to the 2016 election, but then it also kind of came back around and was used just as, like, a symbol for justice in protests in Hong Kong, and it's just sort of become, like, now I feel like Pepe is mostly just a Twitch streamer emote, and it's become, like, apolitical, but, like, I don't know. I just generally, we've done an episode about Pepe the Frog. I'm just kind of fascinated by Pepe being, like, everything and nothing, but in the context of, like, the worst bits of what Pepe has been, it's like, well, yeah, of course, it's like a Pepe the Frog Crusader, Nick Fuentes cluster blank. I don't know why I'm doing that thing where I'm like, can you curse on a podcast? And I'm like, it is our podcast, but it's also your podcast. It's everyone's podcast. I do love the trope when people on podcasts are like, can I curse on here? And then they're like, yeah. And then they, anyway.
Should we just get a curse out of the way just to do it?
It's a clusterfuck.
It is a clusterfuck. It's just fucking totally fucked up. So yeah, no, I mean, Pepe is super interesting too, because, you know, of course, and that's the thing about memes, right? And I feel stupid saying this to you guys, especially, right? But, like,
I feel stupid talking about anything remotely medieval to you.
It's okay. We're all coming into this podcast with our own areas of expertise. Some of us know about medieval history. Others of us know about Pepe the Frog.
That's right. One of those is more valuable than the others in today's world. I will say that. So,
honestly, I don't even know which one's.
Jesus.
Yeah.
We all have really niche careers we've created.
We do. And that's why we started podcasts, because we have to get that out somehow, and let other people kind of, you know, share in our existential terrors or joys, as it were. But yeah, but I mean, the thing about Pepe, right, is or any meme, it's like, it's they're so malleable, is that it can be kind of whatever it is. That's what's weird about kind of Crusader core. And actually, so again, Crusader core is like a newer term, and I don't really like it, because I think it flattens it into an aesthetic, because Crusade imagery isn't pliable in that way. Like, it means a certain type of violence, and, like, you can't escape that. When you put a Jerusalem cross kind of on something, like, that's not an image. And in some of the defense of Hegseth that happened when these tattoos kind of came to light, during his confirmation process, is people said, like, oh, that's a common Christian symbol. It's like, fuck you. No, it's not. Like, it's just not. Like, it's used by very small Catholic orders in and around specifically the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, but it's not used by Protestants. It's not used by evangelicals. It's not used by other communities. And then, like, all of a sudden, this guy who goes to a church in Tennessee, which is based off another church out of Idaho, is showing up with Deus Vult, the rallying cry of the Crusaders, this kafir, infidel tattoo, and the Jerusalem cross. Like, we don't need to play this game where it's just like, well, it could mean a bunch of different things. It's like, no, that dude wants to murder Muslims. Like, that's what it means. That's what all of that in that combination. And the fact that he was in Afghanistan as part of the US military, like, that's part of that context. So when you see these guys on the internet, like, using these images, you know, like, oh, let's launch a new crusade, you know, time for a new crusade, another popular one, or Deus Vult, on we go. Like, that carries violence. Like, it's not like I like incense in my stone covered room with candles. It's like, I want to get an AR-15 and maybe kill somebody.
Yeah, and I've seen that Crusader core as a concept kind of conflated with what's also then being called castlecore, which I think that's more of like what Isabel's going to talk about, where it's like guy pretending to be a knight is just kind of like, yeah, like you can dress up as a knight. It's fine, probably. But then it's interesting how this aesthetic sometimes like, or I don't know, I mean, is it fine to just be a knight? Like in my head, I'm like, knights feel just kind of like a thing.
Well, I think what's interesting about the invocation of the crusader imagery here is that it means two different things when you see somebody in real life have this now. One, it's like, oh shit, they're doing evil stuff, or like they may have all of these beliefs that you just mentioned here, but it also means that they are the sort of person who's going on forums or cares enough about the subculture to like put it on their body or something like that, like a lot of the time. Because if it's like just a random guy who is talking about this stuff and not somebody who's been in the military, then that is a pretty strong signal that this is a guy who is on weird forums. Which is like interesting because this is very much like a old symbol that means something new. You know what I mean? Like where this is like not just an invocation of all of this history, but also kind of like, oh, you are part of a group that has appropriated these symbols and it means a new bad thing.
Yeah. And you're consciously affiliating with it. Like you're making that choice that like, I went on that weird forum and like, hey, that's me.
Yeah.
I want everybody to know about that.
Yeah.
Imagine explaining to a crusader that in 1,000 years, people would be using their imagery on alt-right forums, and just how would you possibly...
Well, first you have to explain the forum. You
have to explain the internet. You have to explain, like, technology. There's a lot that really needs to be broken down.
This is part of the problem, I would say. And this is an indictment of dudes like me, like medieval historians, is that for a long time through the 19th and the 20th century, and like even into the 21st century, and even in today, there are some, right-wing scholars who still do this, is that there's a defense that's mounted of the Crusades as a defensive war against a kind of ontologically aggressive Islam that was trying to conquer the world. None of this is true. But that led to a lot of justification for the actions of the Crusaders as defending kind of quote unquote Western civilization. And they did that in the 19th, 20th century to defend the actual colonialism that was going on. It's that this is a continuation of a war that started, 1,000 years ago in 1099 or 1095 with the launching of the First Crusade. And so that's one of the problems that scholars, I think, run into when they encounter these symbols in the wild, is that those guys on those weird forums, like they're reading sometimes scholarly, sometimes parascholarly work in order to justify their beliefs, not understanding that the field has moved on and there's real problems with citing people like Hilaire Belloc or Michaud or something like that, some of the classic scholars of the Crusades, because they were racist colonialist assholes. And we can say that now, and we should say that now.
Yeah, I feel very of two minds about like online scholarship, where it's like on one hand, I take issue with the implication of like you have to be like at a university, because obviously that's like there's like class aspects there. But then also at the same time, it's like I love people going out and learning things, but then when you're learning about things on your own, then like you might not realize if you're reading stuff coming from like really unreliable, harmful sources.
Yeah.
And especially with something like the Crusades.
Exactly, right? Like, I mean, there's a difference between kind of, when the dudes say, like, and this takes back to the pandemic, right? Like, do your own research, like that whole stupid thing is like, they just meant listen to the dumbest, YouTube video you can possibly imagine and believe that, rather than, actually use some discernment in like, is this an actual kind of reputable source? And is this kind of useful for me to understand this thing or this phenomenon that I'm trying to understand? Like, that's different. Like, I, under no circumstances, would say you have to be in a university to understand the Crusades or anything related to medieval history for that matter, or anything really. But you do need to think a little bit about what you're reading and what you're consuming.
Yeah, I think what's also interesting about these guys is a lot of the times the invocation of the Crusades or anything from like the medieval era is invocation of them trying to borrow legitimacy by saying that, no, like this is part of a grand historical tradition. But it's also like, at the same time, I feel like a lot of the time when people are thinking about the medieval period, especially online, it is as like we're talking about as an aesthetic or like something closer to like a fantasy world or like Lord of the Rings and a place where people actually lived, which is sort of interesting. And that's true both across ghoulish alt-right dudes and gay people on TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, I think even just like Catholicism generally, like I feel like I remember on like 2010's Tumblr, there was sort of like a embrace of the Catholic aesthetic with little like cross emojis and just sort of the more like Gothic aspect of Catholic imagery in a way that is like, I don't know. I mean, sometimes it kind of goes off. Like,
Yeah.
there's some churches that are really beautiful that have like crazy stained glass and shit, but like, there's layers, there's nuance.
Yeah, we were chatting online earlier. Isabel, you mentioned kind of reading this essay by Umberto Eco called "Dreaming of the Middle Ages," and that's kind of a classic. It's a really lovely kind of short essay, and you can find it very easily online if anybody wants to do so. But in that, he kind of suggested that there's 10 different kinds of Middle Ages, and there's actually probably more than that.
Mhm.
But his whole point, I think, in doing that, and when he said there's 10 Middle Ages, is just like there's not like one Middle Ages that people pull from, right? Like there's the kind of fun, playful, again, kind of aesthetic that, you know, is very appealing for like TikTok videos and stuff like that. And then there's the kind of the weird forums kind of version of the Middle Ages. And like all of those connect in some way sort of to the actual past, but they're more about, at least to me, and I think this is what kind of what Echo was saying, is like they're more about kind of making a political or cultural expression in the present
Mhm.
than anything to do with the past itself.
Yeah, like the past as a thing you can draw from to justify your actions in the present, which
Mhm.
I have a hard time like castigating everyone who's doing that universally, because it is like basically like we live within history, like things have happened and therefore things are happening now. But it is interesting. I think that the medieval era feels far enough away, but like close enough that people feel comfortable doing this. It reminds me very much of the way that people treat the Roman era
Mhm.
or like the Greco-Roman tradition, especially in the Western world. And okay, so we talked about a bunch of like pretty dark shit, but like I'm going to talk about some TikTok videos. How does
Yay.
everybody feel about that?
Yay. Yes.
Because this is, you know, everybody's favorite part of a podcast where someone verbally describes TikToks to you.
A classic.
Fantastic. Mhm.
One of the things that I thought would be fun to talk about during this episode was that over the past few years, I want to say like 3 or 4, and then I'm realizing that's 3 or 4 years I've been on like video social media, kill me dead. There have been multiple creators who draw upon a combination of medieval aesthetics and modern aesthetics to create viral content. A lot of the times these creators basically have like an ongoing series of this world that they've created that they are acting within that draws upon medieval like aesthetics but like modernizes them in interesting ways.
Yep.
And the 3 examples for those of you at home are Erica J. Algard, who is, I think, Astro Gururun on TikTok and probably in other places. Parentheses for everyone at home, get off TikTok, go other places. I'm now on Reels and not TikTok. This is from a few years ago. Who does the series about a washerwoman who is living in a castle and the various other characters around this, where basically she is filming almost like confessional booth, like day in the life. The washerwoman is telling you a story about a thing that she is doing, but the washerwoman isn't like a washerwoman as you would think like in ye olden days. This is like a bitchy 20-something telling you, the viewer, about how she has killed a guy to like, you know, get rid of the stain or something like that, or pretend it never happened. Another one, Ben Nauman, who probably has other stuff, but one of his series is he pretends to be a knight who is Twitch streaming. And the and his whole thing is that he is basically talking to chat, and the chat is all various nobles and knights and one peasant that everybody just rags on fucking constantly. And we're talking about crusades. There was a whole series where he went on a crusade and then was like, yeah, I'm like, you know, I'm streaming from the battlefield. Here's how it's going today. And it is very tongue-in-cheek, but it is very much drawing upon these ideas of different medieval characters that people would be able to recognize. Like, oh, this person's like a lady, this person's a lord, this is Gort the peasant, who we all shit on constantly. And then the last one, who honestly my favorite, the greedy peasant, whose whole thing is basically recreating, I don't even want to say recreating, like creating like fantastical costumes of like different saints from like Catholicism, and creating something called the Saint Snap system, which he brings up at any opportunity, which allows him to create a bunch of different costumes. And it is half like role play where he's pretending to be this guy who is like making all of these things for these various Catholic feasts, but then like every character he plays is like essentially talks like a queer person from like 2025, and also like half like here's how you do like costume design stuff. And that's a really cool thing. But all of these are kind of like self-contained worlds that pretend to be medieval. And I think that's very interesting. It's like a cultural phenomenon that people enjoy watching.
Yeah, no, I think that stuff is fantastic. I mean, Greedy Peasant especially. Like, I love Greedy Peasant because he's also like he does cemetery tours too, which are another great kind of little thing that he does. And I think that it's so playful the way that these creators are using the Middle Ages, because the stuff that they're doing, just to take those three that you mentioned, Isabel, for a second, is it could work in another historical period, like in the Victorian age or like set in Bridgerton. So anyway, so yeah, they could be set in anything, but like there is something about the Middle Ages which makes it like kind of work differently, right? Because we picture in our head like what a medieval serving girl would be like, a washerwoman. We know already, before we even know anything, we know what a medieval knight was like. We know what a medieval peasant was like. And then to use kind of those assumptions, but then kind of upend them in different ways is just, that's what makes them kind of fun. And I think you would have to do a lot more work for reasons I don't even know that I necessarily understand in other historical periods. Like if you said it during Rome or ancient Greece or, Victorian or something like that.
Yeah, I feel like it would be a lot harder to do in like the Victorian era. Also partially because it is close enough to our world where there are not like particular crystallized archetypes that are like interesting, I think, if that makes sense, where it's like this is close enough to like a regular guy, which is a weird thing to say about the Victorian era, but I think would be true. And Rome, I feel like, is far enough away from current day and also doesn't have like the fantasy aspect of it, where I think the medieval world, at least for a lot of people online, is associated with like this is the time of fantasy novels. And so this is where all of my archetypes come from, especially if you were like somebody who is not Amanda and has read The Lord of the Rings.
Well,
sorry, not to rag on you.
No, but why do you think it is that, I mean, there is elements of fantasy with like in the Roman Empire, you have like the Roman gods and stuff, but it does seem like what we think of as like high fantasy literature now all sort of stems from that Tolkien aesthetic. Was that just because Tolkien was a medievalist?
Yeah, it's because J.R.R. Tolkien, I do not think, believed that his work would become as influential as it was, because, like, nobody ever really thinks that's going to happen, and he drew upon his own work. And everyone was like, we love this shit. This is what we're into. I think it also helps that, like, Game of Thrones, which was, like, I feel like the next huge fantasy epic, is also, I want to say, like, vaguely medieval. Like, I wouldn't... I actually haven't read enough George R.R. Martin. Do not listen to this podcast. I haven't read past the first Game of Thrones book, so I don't know where it goes from there.
Yeah.
But
I also have not read any of the Game of Thrones stuff because I know everyone likes it, but I just feel like I remember when it was coming out and people were like, yeah, there's a lot of like graphic incest in this show, but it's awesome. And I'm like, I remember just being kind of like, I don't know, this is a weird sell.
Yeah, no, but I mean, if you've seen the show, like you kind of get it, right? Like, like
I haven't
like,
seen the show.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so
it is kind of that time period, right? Like it is a vaguely medieval world with like elements of like low fantasy other than the dragons. Is kind of my understanding of it. Yeah.
What is low fantasy?
Low fantasy is when it's not high fantasy. I hope that helps.
No, it doesn't.
No. Okay. Low fantasy is when basically the elements of magic are not like super pronounced. So it is very much like this is the world where a wizard is very hard to find. In high fantasy, we're all wizards here. Does that help?
That does help.
Also, low fantasy is often much... Okay, I shouldn't just say that because, like, in Lord of the Rings, wizards are also hard to find, but that is high fantasy. Low fantasy is very much like, we are also, like, not heroes. We are just some guy, and we are trying to do our best a lot of the time. And high fantasy is very much, we are the heroes of the realm, and we are trying to do a good thing. Does that help?
Yeah. That does help.
Okay.
I've just always imagined high fantasy as like a specific aesthetic. And then now I'm like, wait a minute. What does that mean?
Well, high fantasy is when weed exists, and low fantasy is when it doesn't within the universe. Does that help?
Yes, that's a great definition. Thank you. By Sublimation, out June 2nd, wherever books are sold.
Neither low fantasy nor high fantasy, although I can confidently say that weed does exist, despite it never being on the page.
That is a good point.
Yeah, that is canonical.
We have to circle back to that at some point. I have thoughts.
Okay, we're way off topic.
No, we could talk about weed. I mean, I recorded an episode just a little while ago in which we just talked about cake for like 20, 25 minutes because who doesn't want to talk about cake? Like, it's just amazing. So anyway.
What was weed like in the Middle Ages? Are there historical evidences of people smoking weed?
So I don't want to spout kind of with confidence here, but I believe cannabis is a New World plant. So there wasn't. Now, there were plenty of, there were mushrooms. People drank lots of alcohol, not in the way that we would, because everything was very, very low ABV, the wine and the beer, for example. So they drank a lot of it, but weren't necessarily drunks, though there were plenty of people who got drunk. So I think that was mostly the kind of the mind altering stuff, but there were also like all sorts of kind of herbal things that we have references to people taking in, people having visions after doing that. So like that's probably a pretty good indication that it was doing something at that time. But yeah, no weed that I'm aware of. So and maybe I'll get lots of angry emails from listeners because I'm wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure.
All of the medieval weed scholars out there.
Maybe there are. Like, I don't, I'm trying to think, like somebody must. And that's another reason why I'm pretty sure is like somebody would have written a book by now on like medieval marijuana or something like that. So
yeah, it rolls off the tongue.
It rolls off the tongue. That's right. So
yeah,
new podcast idea.
There you go. Medieval marijuana. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tiny Matters is an award-winning podcast about tiny things, from molecules to microbes, that have a big and often surprising impact on society. Hosts and former scientists Sam Jones and Debalki Chakravarti embrace the awe and messiness of science, and you can learn about bunny pregnancy tests and the Milky Way and the iron lung, for example. I mean, that's all pretty cool, right? Anyway, this sibling pod from Multitude is brought to you by the American Chemical Society, a nonprofit scientific organization based in Washington, D.C. Look for new episodes every Wednesday.
Sort of adjacent, but one of my favorite things as a journalist is when I talk to academics that are way overqualified for what I need to talk to them about and just ask them really dumb questions. So I feel like I'm kind of getting that. I don't know. I'll be talking to someone who like really in-depth studies like how is like AI used for weird science stuff, and I'm just like, so AI, is it good? Do you like it?
From the other perspective, like academics are so anxiety ridden about answering journalist questions because they will be like in a medieval case, like, well, I know everything about, urban life in Flanders between 1370 and 1420. But if they asked me about medieval cities generally, like, how could I possibly say that? Because they were different in 1220 in Lille or something like that. And it's just like, So when I talk to colleagues, it's just like, guys, like they're just going to ask you general questions. It's okay. So.
Yeah, I don't envy you guys like your jobs and like needing to be accurate, because very much for my job, it is very much Isabel, make something up. If it's cool, it works, and if it's not cool, take it out.
I'm assuming you're not talking about your life as a lawyer, though.
Oh yeah, no. Well, none of this is legal advice. All of my legal work is like meticulously checked, and I'm actually not even joking there. I was quite low on the totem pole, so people were looking at my stuff being like, "Hey man, you did it wrong." And I'd be like, that's fair, man.
Yeah.
It's first time.
They were all like, hey, did you get this case from ChatGPT?
No, okay. So the thing with that is that people, God, it's like a legitimate problem. We've talked about this on WoW True, but just for, everybody at home, there have been many times where a judge has been like, in the last couple of years, like, hey, man, this case doesn't exist. You got it from ChatGPT because of the way that ChatGPT bamboozles lawyers who don't have a lot of expertise with technology. Completely unrelated.
Well, I mean, medieval myth making, like inventing sources and stuff like that, like extraordinarily medieval. My first book was on the legend of Charlemagne in the Middle Ages, in which people just invented things that he did later on and just kind of like inserted them. And then they became part of the record, right? And so some guy would write something in, the 9th century and make something up, and then it would be cited by subsequent histories and stuff like that. So I'm uniquely qualified to deal with ChatGPT.
Yeah. So much history is just things being made up.
Yeah.
Not by historians, but by the people. I mean, hopefully not by historians, but like.
I mean, sometimes like there's definitely I think historian and probably every scholar has a story in which they've chased back a footnote through several iterations, like back to some 18th century guy who just like said like this came to me in a fucking dream or something like that. Like it just happens. Like it just kind of disappears into the ether. Like, and then like it just becomes incredibly problematic.
We even talked about something similar to that on a Wow If True episode, where it was about how there's this statistic about how men don't read fiction, which we'll have to ask you about your fiction reading. But there was a Vox article where this person tried to track down the statistic about men not reading fiction, and then found that it like wasn't really a thing. Like it was just sort of something that was being very like circularly attributed, where like one article would attribute it to another article, and then the next article would attribute it to like some other article, and then like no one ever actually had like the original source. So then we just surveyed people we know about if they read fiction, but the people we know are very particular people. So it was not
It was
the
not a
most
good study.
pure.
It was not the most accurate study.
Yeah.
It would get sent back by reviewer 1 and 2, like, hey man,
Yeah.
what the hell is this?
Not entirely rigorous. So I do read a lot of fiction. And in fact, I live in a small town in southwestern Virginia. We have a local bookstore that just opened a few years ago. It's absolutely wonderful. And a few years ago, 3 years ago now, I started with some friends a book club of just a bunch of guys because we wanted to read fiction and talk about it. And we are known at the local bookstore, because that's where we order all the books from, as the Man Book Club, because because it's all guys. It's 4 or 5 guys, and then every other book club that they work with is almost all women. So I don't know if that actually confirms what you're saying, but yeah, there are groups of us, small groups of us.
Now we know that more men read, which is a great news for us and bad news for that study. But I guess I was going to ask a question. So, do you read like a lot of fantasy? I'm just curious.
Yeah, not a ton, but yeah, that's certainly part of it. Fantasy, sci-fi, literary fiction.
Do you like reading stuff set in the medieval era, or does knowing too much about it ruin it for you?
No, I like it.
Okay.
But I am maybe a minority, probably a minority among my colleagues. People who do read fiction, and I read a lot of like kind of pop nonfiction as well, like, like tech journalism and other historical periods, American history, Asian history, stuff like that. But the medieval stuff, like I don't shy away from. I like reading kind of pop history about the Middle Ages, as well as academic, of course, and then fantasy and stuff like that. I just think it's interesting. Like, fiction is fiction to me. Like, you're telling a story. Like, I don't care. Like, as long as you're telling a good story, like, that's fine. That's the most important thing to me. Even historical fiction, and which is dealing with kind of real events, but then, fictionalized, a lot of my colleagues kind of get hung up on kind of the details of the descriptions, or, well, this event didn't happen like that, or it happened like, this happened before that, or something like that. Like, I don't give a shit. Like, tell me a good story. That's great. Like, this is an academic book. We don't need to do that work. So
Yeah. I feel like it used to bother me more when representations of journalists' jobs in media were like very wrong, but it doesn't. Maybe I think it bothered me more before I had a journalism job, and when I was kind of like on the grind and was like, these people got their jobs too easily.
Yeah.
Like the TV show The Bold Type, where the editor-in-chief really supports these young women and really wants them to thrive and really goes out of her way to help them thrive. And I'm like, that's great if that's your experience. My editor-in-chief is fine. It's just like, she's not like a mythical figure who comes in with like, I don't know.
The very end of How I Met Your Mother, where the main character, becomes a professor because he's a failed architect and just calls a friend at Columbia and becomes a professor at Columbia.
Jesus Christ.
That's crazy.
That ain't how it works. That ain't how it works. But to go back to your question for a minute, Isabel, is like, one of the reasons that I like things set in the Middle Ages, fiction or whatever, or the internet stuff that we were talking about, this aesthetic. I don't like the Crusader core stuff, but the more fun stuff, or video games, or anything like that, is it brings people into classes like mine, or to seek out better sources. So every year I ask my introductory students, and I teach like this intro to the medieval world course, like, why are you here? Like, what do you know about the Middle Ages? And kind of, why do you know what you know about the Middle Ages? None of them have taken a course on it. None of them have read an academic book. None of them have done anything, but they have read a book, read a fantasy book. They've watched a TV show. They've, played a video game or something like that. And then it brings them into my class. And so like, then we get to have an actual conversation about the past. And so that's the exciting thing, like, as, a teacher, to have that opportunity to do that. And I think that's why I love those creators, like we were talking about, because their playfulness with the past leads people not just to enjoy the period, because I don't need them to enjoy the period, but to ask questions about it. Like, well, what was the life of a medieval washerwoman actually like? We know that stuff. Like, we can tell you that stuff. Like, I would be delighted to tell you that stuff. Like, what was the life of a knight actually like? It really sucked, like, actually. So, like, I'd be happy to tell you about those things, because we know about those. And so, like, that's the stuff that I think is so fun about this stuff. And, like, I can't do that stuff, and I'm glad other people are doing it. But, like, it's really exciting to me. It's like it's the farthest thing from being kind of annoying in my view.
What is the life of a medieval washerwoman like?
The life of medieval washerwoman, like, it's actually not that far off, I think, from what that creator was doing. Like, because people have been bitchy 20-year-olds for forever. Like, that's just, people have been bitchy 20-year-olds. So, like, there's a lot of kind of like 21st century kind of agency within that particular creator's kind of vision, right?
Mhm.
Like I'm just going to do whatever I want, and I kind of own the castle, and, I'm going to seduce this knight and push him into the lie and dissolve his body and blame him on, this stain on the thing. Sorry, spoiler alert for that one TikTok. But at the same time, like, there was definitely kind of a threat of power that, a lord would have, or their employer would have over them. There was always the threat of both the kind of physical violence that the Lord could enact upon that person, but also kind of the threat of poverty. But at the same time, like, these people existed like out of supervision from, their supervisors a lot. So they had a fair amount of freedom in kind of how they did their thing. It was grueling and demanding, like the actual work of like hand washing a cloth. Like,
Mhm.
that ain't easy. Like, that sucks. I like modernity in that way
Yeah.
in my washing machine. But
I think I've done laundry by hand one time, and it was
did you?
really annoying.
Yeah. So anyway, but that kind of captures it. But, like, at the same time, exactly like that creator saying, like, these people would be talking to one another, like, about that
Mhm.
way. And they would be talking shit about everything that was going on upstairs. So 100%.
Yeah. I do think what's cool about those TikToks and like TikToks like that are very much like you see in them that people who were born in a different social structure or like
Mhm.
a different culture would still act like human beings. And
Yeah.
that is maybe the good side of social media where people are doing stuff like that.
No, 100%.
Then I also have to ask the follow-up question of, why did the life of a knight suck, and does it have to do with wearing a lot of metal in times when potentially it is hot?
Well, when you went to your chainmail guy, Amanda, who, since you had a chainmail guy, did you put on the chainmail armor? Yeah.
Yes, but only ever indoors.
Yeah. So imagine wearing that in the summer outside
That would be painful and bad.
with extra metal that would be on your head. And then metal, probably, we're talking before the full plate armor that you see in most museums, because a lot of that stuff was decorative, or it was very late medieval or something like that. So we'll just stay kind of throughout the most Middle Ages. Under that, you would be wearing kind of a very heavily padded shirt, because, if the metal heated up and was on your skin, like, it would burn you. So, and then probably a coverlet over that as well. You would be without easy access to water a lot of the time. You would be physically exerting yourself because your sword and your shield are extremely heavy, along with everything else that you're wearing. And then people would be trying to kill you. So
Yeah.
it generally was not great. So, I mean, people did it, and, it probably seemed good at the time.
I have a follow-up question here.
Of course.
Would you say that the knight is like the class of person within the medieval period who is most likely to be a Twitch streamer? And if not, who do you think would be Twitch streaming?
Oh, no, it would definitely be monks. Monks would be the Twitch streamers. So,
Wait, okay. I need to know why. Okay.
So, well, let me qualify this. I'll qualify this.
Mhm.
I could definitely see knights, or especially kind of and by knight, I kind of mean like kind of lower aristocracy. So not like the high nobles or something like that. They would be too refined to be Twitch streaming. But after the battle, like coming back and then playing whatever medieval Call of Duty would be, I could definitely see that. But monks, and not just monks, but like anybody in a cloistered setting, so this could be nuns or something like that as well, is that they are catty bitches who have lots of opinions about everything.
Mhm.
So let me actually take that back. Maybe knights would be the best Twitch streamers. Monks would be the heaviest Twitter users.
Oh,
I could see that.
Just firing off little thoughts about theology, or, what the abbot is doing. Like, I can't believe the abbot like made us go to Nones, and it was freezing and blah, blah, blah. So
I'm imagining like Bluesky or like old Twitter, but like
Mhm.
it's all like tiny little illuminated manuscripts or like the
Oh,
side
yeah.
stuff from like that would go hard.
No, fantastic. Yeah. I mean, like, and then the illustrators would have like, there'd be a subset of monks who were like the illustrators of the manuscripts who would be like super into Instagram, to show off their cute little animals in the margins and stuff like that.
I guess something that we didn't actually talk about on this, but we probably should have, and there's probably like one listener screaming at us about this from the sanctity of their own home, is how like people love to take pieces from medieval artwork and then make them into a meme.
Yep.
And how that has been it is kind of interesting because I do think this happens more with medieval art than it does with other stuff. And I think it's because medieval art, it has a flat quality that it also has a lot of expression in it in a way like other comparable flat stuff, the technical art term, would be probably like ancient Egyptian stuff, but that doesn't have like the expressive quality that medieval art has.
Yeah. And it has a lot of color too. Like these were, really richly colored. So they fit very well on the internet because you can pull an initial from a manuscript, or again, like a weird little kind of bunny or something like that from the marginalia, in which the illustrators. There was a meme account about medieval babies that look like adults, like a while ago, right? Like so, like definitely 100% that is true. There's also a weird medieval guys who is big on Twitter and has a book and is still very active on Bluesky and Instagram and stuff like that. You should go look him up. But they pull again kind of weird things from the margins of manuscripts, which are often characterized as doodles, and sometimes they are just like literally doodles. Like the monk was bored and he drew something kind of or a nun were bored and they just kind of drew something in the margins. But oftentimes, like they're supposed to be representative in a different way. So it's not supposed to be kind of accurate to life, but it's supposed to convey some sort of meaning. Like it's signaling a certain type of text. You draw a rabbit here and your eye is drawn to that passage because it's an important passage and they want you to pay attention to it. But to get to what you were saying, Isabel, was about like the expressiveness of it. I think the color of it and the fact that it looks different than what we would expect. And it seems kind of quote unquote pre-modern too. Like I think that lends itself to, again, that kind of playfulness of it. Like they're so different from us. Look at how they think this thing is, and we can make this into an expression or a meme in some way.
Yeah, but then I do find sort of similar to how it's like the washerwomen were gossiping, we're gossiping, everything is like humans are the same. Like it does kind of remind me of, I saw like Taino cave drawings in Puerto Rico that were like 2,000 years old. And it was just like people drawing like little faces. And it's like, damn, everyone's just out here doodling faces.
Yeah.
Humans want one thing, and it's to gossip and doodle little faces.
And they want somebody else to see it and, make comments on it. Give them a little upvote or a like.
Yeah.
Do you think that the monks and nuns who were making this stuff would be delighted that it turned into memes? Or do you think they would be like, oh God, it's memes? If after you explained to them what memes were,
most of them would be delighted. They would be confused, definitely.
Well, I wonder what the equivalent of memes would be, because I feel like there probably are things that were just sort of like mimetic in culture.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, so one of the things that art historians do, and I'm vastly oversimplifying, and so let me apologize to my art historian colleagues before I say everything that I'm going to say. I don't actually mean it. Is that images are repetitious because they give power in the repetition, right? So in medieval manuscripts, for example, like they like to trace, or art historians and historians as well, is like you can trace like where a manuscript originated because you can see the similarities in the illustration, like kind of going back. And the point was, again, kind of repetition. So it was like, oh, this is a Beatus style apocalypse because I understand what is happening in this image and it's being replicated in these kind of different ways. And like that to me seems very similar to kind of how memes function. Is it gains power because people see this image, they understand kind of what it means because of the visual conveyance of information. So I think like, yeah, they would kind of get it in a different way. It also would play into the fact that it's very hard oftentimes to tell, to my understanding, like where a meme comes from, like who the original kind of person was that creates it, because that's how authorship kind of worked in the Middle Ages. Like it wasn't about the individual person, it was about the conveyance of this kind of larger truth through text or image or something like that. So they would get that too, I think.
Yeah, that's something interesting to think about. I hadn't really thought about the fact that like repetition in a world where instant replication is impossible would have such greater meaning, or like would be
at Walter Benjamin
relevant.
Walter Benjamin mentioned.
God, the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction.
Yeah, I think we both studied.
This is like a faculty meeting now. It's great.
So
They made us read it like 3 times at Penn.
Yeah.
So it talking about memes, localized memes, that is a meme.
Yep.
yeah, Isabel was like a English fine arts double major, and I was like an English major fine arts minor because I was less ambitious than Isabel. But we read Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction like so many times that I'm just like, it's just ingrained in me.
They really wanted us to read that when we were undergrads, and it is very unclear why. It was all different professors, and I think they all thought it was a good text, which
Yeah.
it was. It was just many times.
I think it's that we were taking all of the weird classes about like weird contemporary art. So I feel like the same sort of texts came up.
Well, there's also like there's trends, like there's fads in academia too, like, and so you guys just happen to go to school during the Benjamin kind of phase, like where everybody.
Yeah.
So I went to grad school during the Foucault phase, so like I read
Hell yeah.
fucking Foucault like a million times. Just like I get it, like okay, cool, like thanks, but. Yeah, and so you see that kind of replicated now. So it was the same with anthropology and in history programs, at least like a little while ago. Everybody's reading Geertz, so and then we got over it.
What is the current phase? Would you like the trend?
It varies between disciplines, right? So Benjamin's still pretty hot, I would say.
Okay,
So
we're still in the Benjamin era. Okay,
we're still kind of at the end of our Benjamin era. So I don't know what kind of the next thing is, but the other thing is like things tend to cycle around too.
Might be Foucault again.
It might be Foucault again. I've heard Agamben mentioned quite a bit more nowadays. So Judith Butler.
Yeah.
Judith Butler has been pretty popular, pretty consistent though, too.
Yeah, I feel like we also had to read some Judith Butler, although I might just be remembering that because I took like one gender studies class.
So I also took one gender studies class.
And one like women in science fiction class, I think was also like they made us read some Butler.
Yeah.
Yeah. Read Franz Fanon multiple times.
Oh, yeah.
The book Dictée multiple times.
Now we're just listing books that we've read. Does anyone have any last thoughts on memes or
No, I'm just thinking
medieval
of
memes? Or...
what academic text was I assigned multiple times in college, and there's a lot.
I had to read the Odyssey like 4 times. Anyway.
And it slaps.
Not 4 times.
Did you guys read any medieval lit? Like any romances or Chaucer or anything like that?
So we had, in the English major, there was a requirement that you had to take one class that was like literature pre-1600.
Sure.
And I took an ancient Greek history class and I used that for that. And it was like definitely like not in the spirit of the requirement. Like they wanted you to do something like not ancient Greece. But I was like, well, technically that's pre-1600. And they were like, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say that the one I took for that was like probably on Dante, but I do not remember. It did not stand out to me. And then I do remember one thing that was interesting, like medieval lit wise, where I took a basically like women in science fiction or like in fantasy class. And basically it was one of those like, we're going to cover the entire history of it from like when you can argue that this started happening to like the modern era. And I remember one of the texts that we read, and I'm totally blanking on the author's name, was a French woman from the medieval era who wrote what is like considered like the first novel or something like that.
Christina Pazan?
Probably.
Yeah.
That sounds right. It was like a while ago.
It's either Marie de France or it
was Marie. No,
was it Marie de France?
Yeah, it was the Lays of Marie de France.
Oh, the Lays of Marie de France. Yes. Yeah. So the little, they're like little short stories.
Yeah. And presumably it was that because then we didn't do all of them, and it was just kind of like here's what's going on here, and then here's other stuff.
Yeah. Good for her.
Yeah. I want to say that was probably the extent of the medieval lit that I read, mostly because I have the opposite thing where like I want to read stuff that was written after like 1970, and anything before that I'm kind of like, I don't know. I don't know if that's great.
That's okay. Yeah. I mean, people have their tastes, right? Like, so we're not into shaming here. So
Well, maybe a place to end would be that we asked you some dumb questions about the Middle Ages. Do you have any dumb questions about the internet for us?
I have lots of dumb questions about the internet, but I can't think of anything right now. So,
do people on the internet smoke weed? Yes.
Yes, they do. Yes. Yes, they do. The thing that mystifies me is, here's a dumb question about the internet, which I don't understand the absolute kind of cultural dominance of video, like facing the video, like short form video, social media. Like, I just don't get it. Like, I watch reels and TikToks and stuff like that, but like, it's not as appealing to me. So like, what's going on there?
I think it might have to do with just how accessible it is, where like if you have a smartphone, you have the capacity to make a TikTok that goes viral and then maybe
I want to say it's also that it is easier for most people to watch somebody than it is to read something.
Yeah.
And that most of the people who are active on text-based social media are actually an aberration. And also, the children can't read. The problem is the children can't read.
Oh no.
Not to go into the phonics thing, but to go into that.
I do agree though that like I recently wrote about how I am just befuddled by microdrama, which is like short minute or so long episodes of a show where there's maybe like 40 episodes and they're on these apps that have a very like mobile gaming-esque spending structure where they want you to like pay money and watch ads to see the next episode of a thing, but it's like the absolute trashiest trash possible, to the point that it's like they are using AI to write these because it's just...
But I think part of what it is that the attention span of the average internet user is lower than it has been ever in human history. And video is great for that, because I think what's been interesting is I've seen a lot of like creators have success with, they're doing the same thing in slightly different ways, or it is like, this is my bit that I'm doing in like 15 different ways. And I think it fulfills the same itch that watching a bunch of episodes of TV does, just in much smaller increments.
Yeah. I mean, that's like the most old man question I could ask, but it has been burning in my skull for a while. So
yeah, I didn't get Vine when Vine was a thing. Like I kind of thought Vine was dumb.
I thought Vine was good. That's my hot take. I think Vine was good because it was so constricted that only very funny stuff would float to the top, whereas any longer short form video has ended up being very much more slop, and it was harder for people to... This is good and bad, but it was like harder for people to have a specific political agenda on Vine because it is 3 seconds or something like that.
Yeah. Well, we did it. We have connected the internet and the Middle Ages.
I'm wondering which medieval group would have liked Vine the most, and I'm struggling a little bit there. Probably some mid-level like merchant or something like that trying to sell his bread at the local fair. So I don't know.
Yeah, bread vines.
Bread vines.
Bread vines.
Yeah. I can't talk about cake enough, so we could hopefully a cake maker. Anyway. Hi, everyone, and thanks again for joining us for this very special episode of American Medieval, a collaboration with Wow If True, another sibling podcast in the Multitude family of podcasts. Please, if you haven't already, go subscribe to Wow If True. Learn all about the internet. As you can see from my last question there, I don't know anything about the internet, but they do. Isabel and Amanda both do, so please go subscribe to that. Anyway, that's enough for me. Thanks again for listening. Have a great week. We'll see you all very soon. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of American Medieval, proud member of the Multitude Podcast Collective. I'm your host, Professor Matthew Gabriel, and this episode was edited by Julia Schifini. The theme song to American Medieval is from the song Sleeping Bags by OTE. If you'd like to support the show, get ad-free episodes, be inscribed into the Book of Life for being a kind and generous soul, and get some other neat bonus stuff, please visit us at patreon.com/AmericanMedieval. Thanks again for listening. See you all soon.